Hi, Sai and Sai here for Music Radar. Hey. Today, slight break from the norm. It's a head-to-head.
Yeah, and we're talking software because normally when we are sat here, we are talking about hardware things because, you know, they're big, they're real,
and we like them.
We can get hands on with them, but we're not doing that today. We're to talk software.
The realms of in the box.
Specifically, two really big bits of software which have come out in recent months.
Yep.
So we are talking
Serum 2
and version 6 of Arturia Pigments. And
big hitters.
Yeah, the reason we want to talk about those is because they're big hitters. Both have been pretty significantly updated this year.
Yeah.
And I think actually now, since those updates, they are suddenly, I think they're the two, I'm going to say this now, two best software synthesizers on the market right now.
Okay.
Very comprehensive.
Yeah.
Absolutely excellent bits of kit.
Yeah.
But also they're becoming increasingly similar. I think now is a good time to talk about what's new in both of them.
Yeah.
How they differ a little bit, and if you are in the market for a synthesizer, a software synthesizer, which one of those is the one to go to?
Yeah. Not so much a which one is the best outright, it's more of a which one works for you, isn't it?
It's which one works. Yeah, which one works for you. So first up, let's talk about Pigments.
Okay, go.
So Pigments 6. So the big thing that's been added here in Pigments 6. So if you've never used Pigments before, it uses this system of engines. So you've got two engines here, and what these are kind of multiple oscillator, almost self-contained synths in themselves. So you've got options. When it launched, you had this kind of virtual analog one, the wavetable one. Then we got added a sample engine, which can use multi-samples, one-shots, also can do granular things.
Nice.
This harmonic engine was added a little bit later, which is an additive synth engine. And the new big news for version 6 is this modal engine. So modal is based around physical modeling synthesis, which we've talked about quite a bit recently because we had Steam Pipe in for review recently.
Yeah.
And there's a few other physical modeling things. It seems to be fashionable again at the moment.
Yeah.
So what physical modeling does is it basically, it can model real world sounds, usually kind of strings and stringed instruments, mallets, things like that, using an exciter. And here we've got kind of a couple of different types of exciter. A collision one, which is creates that initial impact, and then friction, which is almost like bowing something.
Yeah.
And then you have this main resonator section. And what that does is it replicates the resonance of an object in a real space.
Okay.
So kind of like, you know, a guitar body or like a kind of a vibrating string or whatever like that. So that's a really nice additional option to Pigments.
Yeah.
And it really kind of broadens out that sound engine.
So you get two slots, which you can pick any of those.
Yep, you've got two slots and you can mix and match any of those sound engines. And then you've got this utility engine here.
Third slot.
And what that is basically it gives you an extra analog, virtual analog oscillator, plus a couple of noise sources, so you can add an extra bit of thickness.
So this would be where you put your sub-oscillator, presumably.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So you've also got this dual filter section here in Pigments, and what that has is all of these masses of options, and there's a few new extra ones that have been added here.
Yeah, and if they dig into their back catalogue of their emulations as well.
Their emulations, and we're going to come on to that in a little bit when we're talking about these. But so firstly, let's talk about what's new in here. You've got this lo-fi filter here. This is a really nice kind of gritty, sort of faux lo-fi sound. I'll do some demos at the end, kind of showing this off a bit, but that's really great for sort of crunchy, old school style dance music.
Presumably came out of lo-fi, their new instrument.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's the same kind of tech behind there.
Really good.
Yeah. You've also got cluster filter, also known as a multi-peak filter, and what that does is it gives you a filter with, as you can see, kind of two different resonant peaks, two or more resonant peaks. The other big major thing that you'll find in the latest version of Pigments, over in the effects section here, is you have this new vocoder. So vocoder, a lot of people are probably familiar with vocoders. It uses a carrier and a modulator, so kind of blending these two signals, using one to shape the other, which results in the most notable kind of type of vocoder sound is those sort of robotic vocals where you're using a synth combined with a human voice to get that sort of classic Daft Punky vocal sound.
But however, you're not tied to that, are you?
You're not tied to that. And there's options for, look, if you can see, you've got modern, vintage and dirty modes in here. And this modulator here, which is the kind of signal that you're using, like you would kind of, you know, a synth sound in a classic vocoder. You have options here to have these you can have that from an audio input, or you can have these internal routings from like the different engines or the utility or filters within Pigments. And actually, I think that's the most fun use for it, particularly if you're putting, say, some drums through for an external input or something like that. You can do some really cool, nice things.
Yeah.
Those are the big things in Pigment 6.
Cool.
I'm going to show you just one little thing which is a bit smaller, which is my favourite thing. So down in this modulator section, you've got this random section here, and these are kind of your randomization tools, a load of kind of things where you can just create, you know, random signals, sample and hold, blah, 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 things like that. This voice modulator is new, and I really like this. Okay. So what this does is, you can see as I press different notes, you can see it cycles through these different levels here, and what that is doing basically is generating a different output value each time you play a new note.
Okay.
So when used subtly, that can be used really nicely for kind of doing slight bits of detuning like you would an analog synth, where the voices are aging differently or whatever. But if you really push it hard and do some extreme things, you can almost use it like, you know, on the Korg, like Monopoly or Poly 6 or thing, where you have that round robin voice cycling thing where you get a completely different synth sound with each note played.
Yeah, you can do
and you can do a bit of that, and that's really fun. Yeah, so that's personally probably one of my favourite things in Pigment 6.
Nice little secret bit.
So let's talk Serum.
There it is.
As we said, Serum recently hit version 2, free update for existing users. And the big new thing that we've got from Serum is that where the original Serum was a wavetable synth, we've now got these different engine types, different oscillator types that we can use here. So Serum has 3 oscillators that you can see here.
Yeah.
Along with wavetable, we can now use a multi-sample oscillator type, where you can, you know, load from the pretty extensive factory library, or obviously you can import your own sounds quite easily. Yeah. We also have a new sample engine, which is unlike the multi-sample, you know, where you're using kind of obviously multiple samples for realism, like a kind of real instrument. Sample engine is a bit more simplistic with these kind of one-shot and looping modes. So for kind of, you know, simple sample synthesis, but you can do some pretty cool creative stuff with it there. Yeah. You've also got a new granular engine. And again, that, like these other modes, is sample-based, but the way it kind of deals with samples is a bit different. So granular, obviously, what it does is it breaks that sample down into loads of tiny little pieces, which you can then use these controls to scan through and modulate and randomize to get those cool sort of grain cloud, unpredictable texture type things, which is a really nice little touch. And then finally, we've got this spectral mode here. And what that does is that's, again, breaking down a sample here across the kind of frequency spectrum. And again, you can use various tools to sort of cycle through and randomize that to get some more interesting textures. Yeah, cool. So beyond those main oscillator types, you've got these warp modes here. So these warp modes aren't necessarily completely new for Serum 2. Right. So they were added in a update, I can't remember which update exactly, in Serum 1. But the difference here is that we've now got 2 of these, and the list is more extensive of what we can do. So if we look at this drop-down list, basically you can do all sorts of things with these warp modes. So you can use these different kind of playback types, which will alter the way that you're playing back the sample or playing back the wavetable. But you can also apply things like filtering, you can apply distortion at the oscillator stage, and you've also got like FM, so frequency modulation, phase distortion, amplitude modulation. So those cross modulation.
Lots of choice here.
Things. And you've got 2 of these for each oscillator. So we could set up, say, you know, I could set up a filter on here. I could set up some phase distortion on here. And then we've got these 2 controls to dial in the different amounts for each oscillator. Okay. So the way these work kind of reminds me a bit of, like, do you remember Massive X, which is the kind of newer version of Nature Instruments Massive, and that has a kind of similar thing where it will apply. I can't remember what the terminology they use in that thing, but it kind of applies these effects to the playback modes of a wavetable. It's kind of like that, but I think there's a bit more flexibility to what you can do in Serum. Okay. But there's lots of other things in Serum 2 that we don't really have time to go into all of them, but there's some really nice bits of the way the UI has been redesigned. So this mix window is really nice. So when you engage these different oscillators and filters, this kind of gives you almost kind of, it's basically a semi-modular setup.
Yeah, sort of channel
how you
strip
can
sort
route
of vibe.
all of the filters. You've got 2 filters here, and that's a new thing for Serum 2.
Okay.
And that is one way. Let's start talking comparisons, because this is one way where Serum 2 feels like it's been significantly updated in response to Pigments.
Yeah.
So Pigments, if we go back onto our Pigments here, so if we go back onto Pigments here, you can see Pigments has this dual filter setup where we've got 2 filters, and we can have a bit of control over which of our engines we send to which one, which of the how you route the filters, whether they're in serial or parallel.
Yeah.
And so if we go into Serum, you can see in Serum now, Serum also has this dual filter section with a drop down with a pretty generous list of different filter types. Again, quite like Pigments, you've got a mixture between kind of simple functional stuff, your kind of sort of multi-mode filters, your classic low passes, etc., and then into things, you know, like comb filters, various ways that play with the kind of the phase or the formants and things like that.
Yeah.
Plus, we've got some new
brand new stuff,
some new ones here, which specifically look at some things modelled on vintage filter designs.
Yeah.
You've got like this DJ filter as well. So that's a new thing for Serum 2. This mix window, which lets you apply, as I said, it lets you kind of route things and move things around really nicely, adjust things like levels and pans. And then you've got the effects window over here. So actually, let me go on to this other instance of Serum I've got here, because I've got some effects going on in this one. And you can see the effects window here, which isn't necessarily new for Serum 2, but it's had a bit of a redesign, and you've got some new and quite cool effects modules in there.
Yeah.
So let's talk a bit head to head. So those are the things, the kind of big significant things that are new.
Yes.
What is the difference between Pigments and Serum in 2025? So increasingly, there's not that much difference between them, is the first point I'm going to say here. As you can see from what's been added to Serum, you've got those sort of new sample-based, spectral, granular modes and things like that. And what that has done is kind of fleshed out the already quite powerful sound engine, so that it goes a bit more, so it's a bit more kind of can go up against these multi-engine modes here in Pigments. The one major thing that you get in Pigments that you don't have in Serum is this analog engine. So Arturia, a lot of people probably know Arturia from the V Collection.
Yes.
V Collection, which has been going for years, which is a big collection of emulated synthesizers. And one thing that ever since version 1 that I've really liked about Pigments is that you've kind of got a lot of that knowledge that has been developed over years of creating the V Collection in kind of emulating stuff, and that's been put into Pigments. So you've got this virtual analog engine type here, which is really nice for doing like, you know, classic virtual analog basses, leads, pads and things like that. But that virtual analog stuff comes through elsewhere within the synth. So within these filters, you've got these analog filter modes here, where you've got ones inspired by like Korg and Oberheim and Roland and classic synths. And then same over on the effects section over here, we've got things like, you've got like the Juno chorus, for example, and various other things, effects that kind of take influence from classic hardware synths.
Yes, yeah.
So that's...
And effects of yesteryear.
Which is probably one of the things that I would say Pigments can do that Serum can't.
Yeah.
But I'm going to caveat that very much with the fact that Serum is... So as a wavetable synthesis is already really good at emulating analog synths, because you can create these wavetables which are like, you know, stacked, sampled oscillators. You can have that sort of variation that you would get from an analog synth. So you can still do incredibly convincing virtual analog stuff within
Just a different
Serum.
workflow.
But you kind of don't quite have that traditional kind of design here.
Yeah, yeah.
So if we're talking oscillators, along with these warp modes here, which we've already touched on, which do kind of have some comparative things within Pigments. So Pigments does a lot of cross modulation things. All of its engines have got ways to modulate and warp in different ways, but it's probably not quite as extensive here. The other major thing that Serum does that Pigments still doesn't is it offers this fantastic wavetable editor. So this is from version 1. This was always one of the big highlights of Serum, and it remains one of the highlights here. What this gives us is basically we can go through, these are the different tables within our wave table. So we can add to these, we can delete them, but we can also jump right in and edit here. We can either edit this kind of wave shape here, or you can go up here, and this is an additive synthesis engine editor basically. So this is like, lets us adjust each of the individual partials, partials being kind of individual oscillators which make up a more complex waveform. So that allows us to do additive synth stuff. You can also import stuff. You can import images, import WAVs and things like that. And so there's loads and loads of flexibility in doing those custom wavetables. And that probably remains one of the major highlights of Serum from a sound design perspective.
Yeah, it's the sound designer's dream machine, isn't it?
So in terms of like a few other points of comparison, so effects, like I said, the effects have been updated for Serum. Let's go on to this one. So the effects have been updated for Serum. One of the best things about Serum is the fact that when you buy it, it downloads alongside its separate plugin called Serum Effects, which and that basically lets you use this kind of virtual effects rack as a effects plugin in within your DAW, which actually really adds to the value of it.
That is good.
Now you can kind of do that with Pigments, because Pigments, that utility engine that you saw before, that lets you route audio in. So actually you can run external audio through the effects there. But the way it's implemented with the separate plugin in Serum is probably still slightly better.
Yeah, because that presumably will use less sort of system.
Yeah, and it just makes the setup just that little slight bit easier. In terms of the quality effects, it's pretty much neck and neck, I would say. Both offer some interesting creative tools. Both are pretty high quality. So I wouldn't really want to call between them on that front. So let's talk about the UI of both of them. Personally, as much as I think the UI update of Serum 2 here is nicely done, and it is really nicely laid out, I would probably like a little bit more of an option over how we can resize things and maybe how you can kind of, change the visual and color things. I think for me, Pigments looks a slight bit nicer, and I think the UI generally is a little bit easier to navigate. And that's particularly helped by this play window here, which is something they added in a update not too long ago. And what that is basically it's a really simplified version. So if you want to dig into playing sounds from Pigments without having to dive into the really deeper stuff in there, it gives like this nice surface level.
Similar to what Alchemy does.
So which is a really nice way to engage with it. And I think that makes Pigments that slight bit more user-friendly. So of the two of them, I think if you're someone who's new to synthesis, maybe, and someone who kind of wants, or someone who wants the preset sounds without having to dive in too deep, I would say Pigments probably comes out slightly ahead on the UI mode. So we're not going to go into this too deep. Like I said, we're going to keep this quick. But the last thing I wanted to mention is the value. Actually, on both fronts, both score really highly here. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to put these head-to-head today. So both, they're not necessarily the cheapest plugins in the world, either of them. Both are around, depending on prices and stuff, you can pick them up from anywhere between about £100, $100 to kind of the 200 mark, depending on whether you get them full price. I would normally say look out for sales, because you can normally find sales, particularly around Black Friday or holidays and things, and pick either of these up cheaper than the kind of whole list price. But there's a couple of things that make them really good value. So for one, both are effectively or have been giving users lifetime free updates. I say effectively, so Serum is very, Xfer, or kind of Steve Duda, who created the synth, has been very explicit about the fact it comes with lifetime free upgrades, which is great. So if you own a license for Serum like from 10 years ago, you've got Serum 2 already. You can just update for free, and that's really great. A really nice value for users. So Arturia effectively have been doing the same thing. If you bought version 1 when it first came out, every update since then has been free. As far as I can tell, they haven't specifically said anywhere lifetime free updates, which does sort of leave the door open for the fact that you could have a paid update at some point in the future. But there's nothing to suggest that at the moment. And
so far, so good.
They've done kind of 6 different major updates, adding things like whole new sound engines, masses of new presets and things, and those all so far have been free. So both synths have come in at really good value for people, and because they're both so broad and you can do so much, you can really pick up either one of these and just use it as a workhorse synth to do pretty much everything you need.
Yeah. It's the one synth that does everything.
The other thing that's good about both of them is you can pick them up through Splice's rent to own deal, which I always think is a nice way to get hold of these things, because I think you can basically pay, I think it's £10 or $10 a month to effectively rent them, and then once you've rented them for the amount of time you own it, and you can pause that and things. So accessibility wise, both are a really good way to get your hands on a deep synth.
Yes.
If you're kind of just getting started in making electronic music and want something like that.
Okay, so from the outset, we weren't going to pitch them as in one against the other, but more as a kind of which one's best for a different type of use case compared to the other. So I'm going to pin you down. Pigments best for? Or best for whom?
So let's caveat this with the fact that I think you can pretty much do everything you need with either of these synths.
Yeah, okay.
And there's so much flexibility in them now that you can do all sorts of sounds, from virtual analog to really modern things to kind of warpy, strange noises.
Yeah.
But as I said, the virtual analog engines and some of those kind of V collection like things within Pigments do really add to its appeal as a tool for emulating kind of virtual classic synths and things like that, and do that side. One thing, I've got a little patch I set up here quickly, and this is, I think, just a good example of the fact that obviously that, unsurprisingly, Pigments, it can do sort of Roland style pads and things like that. But what I've got set up here is just using this sequencer, randomized and things, and this synth. I've got some kind of FM stuff going on here, these low pass gates and things like that, to basically create something that's effectively like a little kind of buckler style West Coast modular thing where you can dial in some wave folding, FM, shimmer, reverb, and it's all kind of creating randomized patterns using this sequencer, which is just making sort of bleepy noises at the moment. But just as a cool example of how I think you can do, throwing in these randomization things like that as well, you can do things beyond just emulating, your big kind of Roland polysynth and things like that. Yeah. And it's almost at a point now with Pigments, as I said in our review, that I think it can do so much that the danger for Arturia is that it's almost overshadowing the V collection, because you've got these kind of West Coast type elements, you've got the classic samples, you can do old school wave tables and things like that, get a bit crunchy. And realistically, if you really dive into that, there's not that much you can do in the V collection with those classic synths that can't be replicated in Pigments.
So I see what you're saying. Yeah, so it's
if you had to pick a highlight for Pigments, that's what that would be.
Yeah.
So
the familiarity of the emulated, the subtractive, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
The old school.
For that kind of sound design, it's great. Yeah. So Serum, as I said before, the one, I think the highlight of it still is this wavetable editor. And if you want to go properly deep into designing sounds in that way, that's probably where Serum shines. It's also really clean and precise sounding in a way that's still hard to beat. And so I think if you're working in genres, maybe stuff like very modern drum and bass and stuff that has that really kind of clean, precise, bass heavy sound, it's really is a kind of the probably the top tool out there for that kind of thing. And I've got a little sound going here with just some, which is just kind of putting together a bass sound with some different elements that phase in and out. So that just being a really quick example of those kind of where we've got mixture of wavetables and granular and kind of raspy filters and a lot of bass, but also a lot of precision. And so I think that's probably where Serum 2 still shines. Realistically though, you can do whatever you need out of both of them.
Yes.
As I said, they're good value. And also because they're lifetime updates, you probably already own one of them. And if you already own one of them, then you probably don't need anything else.
No. In a nutshell, they're both amazing. And like you say, you probably own one of them already, so crack on.
Tell us your favourites.
Tell us your favourites. Get fighting in the comments. We love to see it. We'll join in as well. And obviously, while you're there, don't forget to like, subscribe, all that stuff. Hit those notification buttons, all that business. And we'll see you again soon for some more gear demos and features and whatnot. So until next time, goodbye.
Thanks.